Hi, my name's Jon Smart. Welcome to the next episode of the Sooner Safer Happier podcast. And in this podcast, we are speaking to people, practitioners and leaders who are leading on improving ways of working at large companies. And I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Manterfield at ABSA. Hi, Nick.
John, hello, how are you? It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon.
I'm good, thank you. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for coming along and having a chat and sharing your learnings and your insights. So first of all, Nick, would you like to just introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your role and your background.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Nick Manterfield, based in South Africa, been here for about 15 years, as John said. I work for a full-service financial services company called ABSA, based in Johannesburg. We have a presence in about 15 countries across Africa. We have rep offices in the US and the UK. So, and I guess we do like full service banking all the way down from sort of retail individual banking through business, SME business, all the way up to corporate investment banking. Which is I guess where I've spent most of my career and certainly my time working at ABSA. I've been at ABSA about 15 and a half years now, I think, in various roles, always in the corporate investment bank. First started in sort of more in the trading space, working with FX technology, rolled out some new trading systems into our African businesses, and then kind of sort of moved more across to the corporate side of the bank. So I currently look after technology for the corporate bank, which actually includes risk and finance technology. I actually look after payments technology for the group as well, which kind of is in fact, both are kind of sort of Pan-African. So we run a single technology stack across all our countries for corporate investment banking and for payments. So yeah, that's kind of my background and what I'm doing at the moment. It's lots of fun.
Great, nice one. And in terms of ways of working, Nick, in terms of agile, lean, waterfall, what's your, over the course of your career, what's your experiences with different ways of working?
John, I think we've had exposure to probably every flavor I can imagine over my career. I mean, I guess I started work actually in London, in a bank in London before I moved to South Africa. I guess ways of work were quite different then. So I had plenty of exposure to sort of waterfall, more traditional ways of work. And I think it's taken quite a long time for banks and big sort of regulated organizations to really begin to think about transforming their ways of work. So and I think we all know that it's happened like probably more around the technology teams as we brought people in from other industries. Scrum is adopted. We have kind of agility in the middle around the development cycle, but not end to end. And I think that's really where I'm trying to focus now, is really look at that end to end agility. I think we've tried lots of models. I mean, I think our introduction to sort of agile at scale, we did touch safe briefly 6 or 7 years ago, and we took bits that we thought made sense for us at the time. Many teams still do PI planning, really nice way for technology and business to connect on a quarterly basis and talk about what's important. Some teams don't do it. They feel like they're really clear about what they've got to get done, and they don't feel the need of spending 3 days talking about it. They just want to get on with the work, and that's also fine. We've experimented with the Spotify model very briefly. It didn't go well. We dropped it in. It was abandoned very, very quickly. I've had some teams pull things from the Basecamp stuff. Actually, there's some really nice stuff in there. So some teams have taken things like shaping from Basecamp. Where you take sort of a more senior team a quarter ahead, and you try and shape work to a certain degree before it kind of feeds into the next cycle. So we've experimented with shaping, and I really like hill charts. I don't know if you've ever seen hill charts in any of the Basecamp stuff, but I just love the way they represent where work is in such a simple visual way. So I think we've experimented. We've experimented a lot. I would say the last couple of years, all our work or most of our work is focused around really the Kanban models. I mean, I think we've landed there over many, many iterations, just because the method feels very evolutionary. It's kind of all our teams are at different levels and at different stages, and the philosophy with the Kanban stuff is just start from where you are and try and improve something. What's what's slowing you down, introduce a change, see what happens, measure what happens, and start to make changes up the curve. So yeah, I mean, we're probably spending more of our focus around Kanban, starting to look at the Kanban maturity model that David Anderson's developed, trying to get that working at scale across different value streams, trying to figure out how we report up, make information that's in CFDs, scatter charts, make sense at scale across teams. And so yeah, lots of different things that we've experimented with, and it's been a real journey.
I love the fact that you've kind of ended up gravitating to the principles of the Kanban method, as in pursue evolutionary improvement, honor the current roles and responsibilities, and pursue evolutionary improvement. Because I guess that's going at the pace of unlearning, that's going at the pace of change, um, with the right incentives in place. And I think then my reflection is as well. You then get, I think you get. Tell me if you're seeing this, Nick. I think you get more internal ownership in people because people feel like they're driving the change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think these models, and I'll say I'm a little bit wary of the scale agile framework. Although we used it 6 or 7 years ago, and there were really good things in there, and it's a really good body of knowledge to be able to look at. But just installing a way of work, I think like can lead to some of the side effects that you're highlighting where you don't get the level of ownership. And I think it's so important for teams to grow and mature in a way and at a pace that works for them, given where they are, and both in ways of working and with their technology. Because if you don't do that, then the adoption is I think is not at the same level, and people are just in different places at different times. When you're building something, I don't know, you might need to organize around microservices, and then it matures and things come together and you change and you organize around features that cut across microservices or something like that. And each team is on their own journey. And I think that, the Kanban framework really, allows that, but also, there is a maturity model, and those need to be treated with caution. I feel like KMM stuff is a bit different, but, there's a path to growth. And, the other thing I really love about the Kanban approach is that it feels like there's just real science and data that's telling you if you're improving or not. I mean, for me, that was something that I scratched my head around quite a lot. A few years ago, prevalent methodology was Scrum. Everyone was talking story points, velocity. It feels a little bit abstract. And the thing that I was always asking, well, this is great, but how do we know we're getting better? It didn't feel like more story points or higher velocity was necessarily an improvement of us getting better, and it felt like a small cycle in the end-to-end value chain. And that's where I think that's what it's really changed with Kanban, that we're looking at end-to-end cycle time and lead time. We're looking at throughput, and there's real science behind it. So we've plugged a tool called Nave, that we found into our workflow tools, Jira and Azure DevOps, and it pulls out a lot of data, draws a lot of charts, and we get scatter charts, we get CFD charts, and all many of the teams are now using that, and it feels like there's real measurable improvement, coming out now, and yeah, it feels like we're on a good journey with that one, and we found some great people to work with as well. So
I'd love to come back to that topic around data, visualizing data, because it is the feedback loop. It's obviously
yeah,
critical. And before we come back to that, Nick, what are your top 5 learnings? So if you were at your like elevator pitch, after your career to date and all of your learnings around how we do what we do, what would you say are your top 5 learnings?
Yeah, John. I mean, there's a lot in there. Let me try and distill them. I've talked about the first one a little bit, and I think it's so important to allow the shape of your teams and your organization to change and adapt at a pace that makes sense, to where they are right now. So they'll change based on where they are in their ways of working, where on their technology maturity is, that things are going to adapt at a different pace. So trying to just say, cool, everyone looks like this next week, or everyone looks like this, in my experience, really doesn't doesn't work well. And for me, this process of it's really a process of learning, right? It's creating that process of learning individually in all the teams is the only real way that you actually start to mature and start to learn. This is what, for me, this is what agile maturity, agile transformation, digital transformation is that all the teams, individually adapt and learn what this is about. And you can't achieve that, I don't believe by installing a framework and just renaming a load of roles. It doesn't work. You don't go through that learning cycle. It's lost. So I think that's the first point. I think there's a second learning which has been quite profound for me over the last few years, and again it was really inspired probably by reading Mick's book on on project to product. But we've made that shift. I feel we've moved from talking about projects that start in January and end in December, and we disband all the team and all the funding's taken away, and then we try and restart everything in the following January. We've moved away from that, and we're talking about products which really exist inside value streams. So we think of our business in terms of core value streams. So in the corporate bank, it might be cash management, trade finance, maybe FX. We've obviously got the trading pieces in the investment bank. And inside those value streams, we have products, and they're long-lived. We invest in them every year. And then I guess underpinning products, we have a core set of platforms that cut across products. So that's also part of our model. So, Mix talks about project to product. For me, it's about project to product and platforms. And these platforms are so important to help us make our products go faster. And I think that's a big shift for us. And for me, we're much more efficient as an organization, having made that shift. And we can maybe come back to talk about that a little bit more. So, that's probably the second one. And I think when you make that shift as well, John, you have to shift from talking about outputs to talking about outcomes as well. Because, when you stop measuring Gantt charts, it's like, well, what are you looking at? You have to start looking at the outcomes if you're not measuring projects anymore. So, so that's a key part of the transition. I think I talked about platforms there, and I think generally many organizations possibly don't invest enough in platforms. That would probably be a third thing for me is, like invest a lot in your platforms to help you build your products more quickly. And sometimes it can feel like a little bit slow down to go faster, but I think the benefit in the long term, is really there. If you get a really, really strong team and really think about how you build a platform that's going to accelerate your change and your development. And there's maybe a sub lesson in here about, autonomy and, too much autonomy maybe being the enemy of speed. I'm a big believer in giving people, autonomy in their work, but sometimes if you go too wide when you're trying to move at speed, it can actually slow you down and create a mess. So that's probably the third part. The fourth part I've touched on a little bit, and about the stuff I really discovered when I sort of picked up Dan Vicanti's book on agile metrics for predictability. And I think if you start to understand the science around measuring the flow of work, and there's a lot of it, and really get into that and try and get your teams and your organization to understand it, I think you're going to see real improvements in flow of value, flow of work through your organization, and also predictability. I mean, one of the things that almost I think every organization I've worked in or talked to struggles with is the business feel that technology work is, not predictable, and we always overcommit and underdeliver. And, for me, trying to build stable systems of work that don't have high variability, allows you to start to become more predictable. And, for me, the holy grail, and we're not doing it right now, is about to use Monte Carlo simulations or something like that to try to increase the predictability of our delivery. And then, I think the last one and is probably really about through any major transformation. It could be a technology transformation, it could be a ways of work transformation. These things take years and years and years in big organizations, particularly banks. They're not things that are done in 6 or 12 months. And I think there's real value in trying to keep consistent and stable leadership through those sort of transformations. I think you see many organizations that will start something, and then you get new leadership come in. They have different views of the world, different ideas, and it really, really slows it down. And to try to get something, whether it's a platform or a system or a thing that you're building or a way of work, to the point where the thing is bigger than the people who kind of started it, and it has momentum and life of its own so that it can survive. I think is really important, but you need, technology and business support consistently behind those things to drive big changes through like that as well. So that's probably the last observational learning that I've got.
Spoken with true experience and, by the sounds of it, learning the hard way. That's how
Yeah,
that sounds. That's a very. I love that. I love that set of five. I like the breadth that you're covering there, Nick. And I have so many questions. We could talk. We could talk for hours. Um, so I'm going to come back. We're going to come back to some of those. Some of your top
cool.
learnings there. The last one in particular really resonates about the fact that this is measured in years. That really resonates,
Absolutely, yeah.
and this is because this is human behavior change. That's why this is
Yeah,
measured in years. And I'm sure we've all seen lots of instances where, as you said, old leaders leave, new leaders come in, and you've got 3 years worth of progress, and that's all goes backwards in 6 months. Um,
absolutely. It doesn't take a lot for the antibodies to start to multiply. As
mm,
soon as like the doors open a little bit and there's a glimmer of light, people can put their foot through the door. And I think if you've got really strong top level leadership or senior leadership behind what you're doing that can carry that through, it's so important to the success of it. Because otherwise, yeah, things just lose momentum. And I think you can point to so many. I mean, fortunately, I think we've been reasonably fortunate that we've had reasonable support behind what we're doing. I mean, I've certainly been there through a big part of this transformation from a technology perspective, and I think in our business have had really fantastic support. So yes, people have left, and we've had new faces come in, but there's been a core of people who've really believed in what we're trying to build, and also in transforming our ways of work. And I think if we hadn't have had that, we really would have stumbled. And you can see it, and you can see it in other organizations. You can see it in competitors where things change, and they write off like tens of millions of pounds of investment because someone else thinks there's another way to do it, and it's waste.
yeah,
It's huge waste.
it's interesting as you were talking there. What was going through my mind is the Rebel Alliance. If you
Yeah,
even if you have a change of senior leadership, if there are enough, if there the resistance, if there are enough people who are fully aware that this
yeah,
is a better way of working, that is more engaging and leads to more value more quickly, it will carry on, even if it goes a bit underground. You kind of have the Rebel Alliance, the resistance. In terms of your context, Nick,
yeah.
could you say a little bit about your context and the why? So a bit about ABSA, maybe a bit about the yeah any kind of starting point. I know you've been working on ways of working for a while now, but from an organizational archaeology perspective, what did things used to be like, and what's the reason for change?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting history to this organization, and I think maybe I mean I probably won't go back as long as I've been there, but I think if I go back maybe 6 or 7 years, and I would say that was probably what lit the fire for the change is we, like I said, Barclays Group, an organization well, John, used to be a majority shareholder in ABSA, and they decided they wanted to sell their business interests in Africa a few years ago, and sell Barclays Africa. And I can't remember the exact date. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And this really kicked off an enormous program of work inside the bank, that I was working in, and it was really it was a huge corporate divestment. And particularly the part of the bank that I was working in, the corporate investment bank, was heavily constructed on top of Barclays global assets. So we'd used technology that had been developed in Barclays globally to kind of bootstrap and grow our business, and shared IP, and we had to unwind all of this and actually really rebuild a lot of stuff from scratch. So we had the opportunity to really start again with a lot of stuff, reimagine how we build our technology, how we build our customer facing value props. It wasn't just technology, there was branding and all that sort of stuff. But what it did is it created this huge sense of urgency and focus across the organization for like a period of about 3 years. There was almost nothing else that we talked about. And it was absolutely it was probably the biggest technology transformation program in the world at the time, I would believe. And I think as an organization, we executed extremely well because there was just this huge focus, and I think that was really the springboard for probably where we are today. Was that that intense focus around separating from Barclays. And what I was thinking about earlier, what was really interesting about this work is it's actually an enormous waterfall project, because we had a drop dead date. We had, like, I can't remember what the date was, by the end of this year, or this date in this month on this year, we're pulling the plug out and we're not part of Barclays anymore. So we had this absolutely enormous, like, multi-year waterfall project, and you had all these teams inside trying to, like, run agile and do agile delivery inside this huge waterfall project. But somehow we managed to execute it. I think we executed it really, really well. And I think that was really the springboard for kind of the next, what I would call the next phase of change, which I think was probably catalyzed by maybe a little bit of restructure, where we moved our business-facing technology teams closer to the businesses. So we almost federated our technology model soon after that, and really the teams that were business-facing, working on customer-facing product, moved into the business areas. We use the term embedded technology in our organization. There's obviously still teams in the center that look after assets that don't make sense to federate out, but certainly the stuff that's facing the businesses got more closely aligned with the businesses. And I think that at that point it was we had this enormous focus, like how do we kind of keep the energy, keep the focus going on what we're doing? And those are some of the questions that we were asking ourselves. And I think that was when we started to discover like OKRs and thinking about outcomes, and I think it was that focus element, because we've been so focused on one particular outcome. This program have ended, and we were like, how do we maintain that level of focus in what we're doing? And I think it was probably around a similar time that John Doerr released, Measure What Matters, and a few people read it, and it felt like there was something there around creating focus, and I would say that was probably what started the next phase of our transformation. I'm talking about in the area that I was working in, which was the corporate investment bank, where we started to talk more about outcomes over outputs. We started working with OKRs at various levels of the organization. And in parallel, then that started, to create more focus. It started to force maybe different prioritization conversations. And I think that also kickstarted the project to product transformation at the same time as well, because it felt like those things almost go hand in hand. That if you're talking about outcomes, business outcomes particularly, like it's kind of weird talking about projects and outputs. You need a different way of really measuring progress in terms of real business outcomes. So I think that probably kickstarted the next phase, and I think we're still working with that. We're still working with those constructs now, John.
Yeah, and so then in terms of maintaining the incentive, so you had there was the divestment, the Barclays divestment, ABSA, back again to standing as a bank, as ABSA. So how was OKRs the way that you maintained the incentive to keep on improving? Is there like a top level OKR, which is improve how you do what you do? What's the incentive for people to go through fear, maybe fail, in order to improve?
Yeah, look, I think it's an evolving framework, and I think there's a few things that we look at and measure. Certainly within the corporate investment bank, there are a set of outcomes or OKRs that we do measure and track at sort of an exco level that represent our whole business, and those are discussed and curated at exco and are looked at in various sort of operating committees. So I think that is there, and I think that is the basis for the value question, obviously, like, are we doing the right thing? Are we chasing the right things? And, obviously they also align to key pillars of the strategy. So they have to work with the strategy. So we have our strategic objectives and the group strategy and the strategy. And then, the OKRs are, what are we really focusing on to execute on that strategy, and how are we doing it? How are we doing at it? So trying to measure those key results to tell us, are we moving in the right direction towards our strategy? So, that's an important pillar of it. And I think the flow metrics and the stuff I talked about, flow is really the other piece of kind of, are we getting better at our ways of work? Those are really the two of the big pillars, and that really talks to the sooner part of it in your book, and really measuring how teams are progressing, trying to roll that up at scale. And I think there's the big cultural change, obviously, which I think with this way of working, is that there has to be like a cultural shift in leadership to be able to push decision making down into teams. I think that's probably one of the hardest transitions that big organizations have got to make, is for leadership to say, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to measure it, but actually you go and figure out how we're going to get there, and and do the work in the teams. And and I think that that's always hard, and I think it sort of matures at different speeds in different areas, and there are varying levels of success. But that really is the transition and the shift that we're trying to make, is to look at those outcomes and allow teams to do it. And we've had some really great stories around that. And then I guess the other pillar is sort of team happiness. We do have some measures of that we look at for team happiness as well. And we've got a great team of coaches that are working with us in the organization as well, particularly on the flow stuff. So I think that's kind of where we are now, and we'll continue to look at how we can improve it and mature it going forward.
You mentioned leaders and helping leaders on the journey, allowing teams to evolve, allowing teams to learn. So your very first lesson learned was allowing teams to evolve, and not being too prescriptive. However, minimal viable guardrails. There are some things that are not negotiable, to the other thing that you said, Nick, which is the risk of too much autonomy. So minimal viable, like a wide road with high curbs, minimal viable guardrails, allowing teams to evolve their ways of working within those constraints. Now, and then you mentioned leaders and leadership. I'm interested. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing or what you're seeing around leaders, and that's leaders at all levels in all roles. So it doesn't need to be people management. It could be an individual contributor. Leadership is, in my opinion, it's the biggest enabler or it's the biggest constraint. So I'm interested. What are you doing on the topic of leaders and helping leaders to change behaviors from command and control, dictatorial, to more emergent, empowering servant leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think you probably need different approaches at different levels. So I think really right at the top, and at sort of business unit excos, we try and it's really a process of education, right? So we try and make them understand different ways of working. We get people like yourself in, right, to talk to them about actually, this is what we've done here. This is why. These are the results that you can see. And when we talk about change as well, at a top level, we start to use a different language. We're using the language of, outcomes. We're trying to show improvements in flow. We take teams that are doing this really, really well, and showcase them in sort of leadership sessions, and showcase the change. And I think it's a gradual process of people, I guess, rewiring their minds about how you really deliver the change, and it starts to change the language, and keep saying things, and then you hear people repeating them back to you eventually. So I think at a top level, I think we've also done quite a lot of some training, and I was it was interesting when we started playing with SAFe, I was, for some reason, I was quite against like doing lots of formal SAFe training. It just didn't feel right. It didn't seem to make sense to me. And there's maybe because there were pieces of the framework that we wanted to use, but we have been doing quite a lot of Kanban training, with leadership in teams, so product leadership, technical leadership, change leadership. So we've doing quite a lot of formal, what we call KMP training, and I think across the areas, and we try to get, obviously get teams in together rather than sending all the technology people, all the product people, get the whole team in together and do Kanban certification, KMP1, KMP2, do the training. And I think that's really starting to, to shift the mindset at the next level down below the exco. And I've seen those penny dropping moments, and in fact, I've had them myself. When I first read Dan Vacanti's book and I started looking at these charts and reading what's in there, I was like, okay, no, this makes sense. There's something here. And then I ended up just like, I don't know, reaching out to contacts I had in the industry, and I said, do you know anyone who really gets this stuff, gets this Kanban and flow and measuring that? And someone connected me with a chap who's still working with us now, who's doing a great job. And I got a bunch of people, a lot of them were my team and a few other people in a room, and we played that Kanban board game. And I think just people really start to realize very, very quickly that trying to shove more work into the system is just counterproductive. That you can measure this stuff. That there are people who are blocking things, and you can see them so clearly when you think about it like this. That everything being an expedite just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. And there were so many penny dropping moments. And for me, I've started to, you light the fire in one place, and then you see it take, and not everyone buys it at the beginning. Some people are skeptical, and others really love it and adopt it, and you keep feeding them, and then you light the fire somewhere else, and then you light the fire somewhere else. But it didn't feel like a very difficult fire to get burning, because it made so much sense. And I think the other thing is with what we're learning through these processes is actually the teams, they want tools and mechanisms to say, stop overburning us, stop pushing more work into the pipe. It's making us go more slowly. Intuitively, I think they knew that, and there's so much work in progress that we're not moving forward. But actually having the tools and the language to be able to go back to prioritization forums, whatever it is, to businesses and say, look, if we do this, it goes quicker. I think they really, really embraced that, and they understood why, and they could see it working. So we've trained quite a lot of people in Kanban, and I think for us this feels like the right path at the moment, and is working well.
I'm going to paraphrase Dan North. It's like switching the light on in the room, and you see the tiger that was always there. Yeah. By visualizing the data, you can see that, oh my goodness, I didn't realize we were saying yes to twice as much work as we could possibly do. And so that I have a similar story, which is when we did this for one business area, visualize the system of work, effectively switch the light on so you can actually see what's happening. And that was the case. This business division was saying yes to twice as much work as it could possibly produce. And as soon as we actually were able to visualize that, it was like, oh, well, okay, fine. Where's the constraint? Where's the bottleneck? Let's alleviate the bottleneck. We're going to stop saying yes to twice as much work as we can possibly do. We're going to stop having role-based SLAs, trying to local optimization, trying to get one role to do something in one day that can't possibly be done in one day, leading to lower quality. Completely agree. And actually just reflecting across industry sectors, across organizations, this is a very common area for improvement is most organizations don't have enough data on the system of work. And it can be on behavior as well. It can be on engagement, happiness, psychological safety. This is so important because this is your feedback loop. And I think, Nick, as you will have experienced, some people are motivated by storytelling and some people are motivated by just show me the hard data. And I love what you said, where you said this actually gives the teams a vehicle to have a conversation, which is, look, we're just doing feature development. We're not doing any continuous improvement, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you talked about twice as much work. I heard something the other day saying, I think one of our teams is doing 10 or 12 work items per cycle, and there are 100 new items hitting the backlog every cycle. It's crazy. There's almost 10 times the demand of the capacity. And I think when we also started with these teams, we spent You look at the aging WIP charts, and you had so many like old items that had been out there for hundreds of days. So some teams, they spent probably 6 or 9 months just getting rid of all those super aged items to get the kind of system of work stable, that generally you were starting items, you were finishing them, and you start to build a more stable system, and you really build that baseline for for going forward at that point. So yeah, it's been really, I feel it's been really transformational for many teams, and I say we're starting to spread it out more and more and more now, and I hope it will continue to create an impact.
So I think there's a key learning here, there's a key takeaway here, which is it's important to have a data work stream for ways of working, to be able to shine a light, visualize the system of work. Because if this was physical manufacturing, we would see the inventory stacked up on the factory floor. But because it's knowledge work, we can't see it. So I think that's a key takeaway. That's a key learning. And also simulations and exercises. You mentioned the Kanban game. Maybe that was Get Kanban.
Yeah, it was.
And
Yeah, it was that one.
And portfolio simulations. The simulations are a great way to experience flow. And likewise, I've seen the light bulbs go on above people's heads when you actually do it in a simulation exercise, as opposed to like a classroom in the theory. And this is something I've done this with like C-suite.
It doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much. Yeah,
it doesn't take much. Within an hour or two, you can really, really like have those oh wow kind of moments.
Exactly. And I've done a session like this with an exco, and it was with Lego, and it was like building things with Lego, and loads of light bulb moments, loads of aha moments. Nick, I want to come back to your second lesson, your second biggest learning, which is project to product, value streams, long-lived products. I'm interested to hear a bit more on this topic. So, how did you go from role-based silos, work passing, sequential, kind of first industrial revolution way of working, to long-lived teams, value streams? Maybe if you could just say a little bit about the journey, about how you got there, your advice for anyone who's on the beginning of this journey, how to get there, and also funding. Like maybe talk a bit about the funding as well. We'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just started around a conversation of, I think, for anyone who works in, most big organization, banks particularly, work in annual funding cycles. Ours certainly does. I'm sure most banks do. And, I think prior to this shift, there was so much management time spent trying to understand what projects we were going to do in the next cycle. And there would be these enormous spreadsheets of things, and like maybe semi-fabricated business cases, but so much of the stuff you found was a continuation of something we'd started in a previous year that had rolled over, and we needed to carry on investing in it. And I think through conversation we just got to the point where like we agreed. And look, I think our rebuild under the Barclays divestment helped this, because we really transformed our landscape, and we had probably a clearer set of value streams or products that we were building in value streams, and maybe the strategic or end state estate became a lot clearer as a consequence of that work. But it was really just a conversation with the teams that manage the annual funding cycles to say, we're still spending, well, for a start, we call it strategic investment, capital funding, project funding. We spend a huge amount of the organization's resources on this, but a lot of it is the same stuff every year. Our businesses are the same. Like, we're a bank, we still do FX, we still sell cash management products, we still do trade finance, we still do working capital, we still do equities. And actually the systems that support those value streams or those products that our customers consume are largely the same every year. Either occasionally there's a big project where you really want to rip a vendor out and do something different, but actually having built a lot of the technology ourselves through the divestment, we found we were just investing more and more in these products and these systems that we built under the Barclays separation. So I think, and that was really the trigger for the conversation. I think it wasn't, people just understood that actually, we still needed to invest in these platforms every year. They were core pieces of technology that underpinned our business. And, the debate should be around, where do we direct the most funding? Like which value streams or which areas of the business need, is there a particular opportunity, potentially need more funding in a cycle? But they all need some funding and they all need stable teams around them. And most of these platforms are going to be things that are going to be with us for the next 10 years. And, I think there was an understanding as well, in the business that technology, the way technology is now, it's not implement a system, run it, sweat it for 15 years, it's end of life, new project, let's buy something else. Like, when you start to build a lot more of your own technology, this is just a continuous cycle of regeneration and reinvestment, and slowly iterating and refactoring pieces of it. You move away from those big cliff events and those big bang sort of waterfall projects. And I think the business understood that in the context of what we were building as part of the divestment. So it was a pretty easy conversation. And I would say generally, projects for us, what I would call real projects, have become the exception in our sort of annual book of work. And 80% plus of our strategic investment goes into the things that we want to carry on building, which are the core technology assets that sit behind our business that our customers use every day. And yes, we do get some regulatory projects, or we still have some vendor systems in certain parts of our businesses that might need replacing over time. But those are very much the exceptions and the edge cases. I think the funding conversation is still, or the funding is probably still viewed on an annual basis, and I think changing that is probably the next iteration. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I think that's a much more difficult thing in a bank, but we're very much at the place where the investment conversation is much simpler than it used to be a few years ago. We understand that these are our core technology assets that need continuing investment, from one year to the next.
Do you find that you're now doing more rolling wave type planning? So whilst any public listed company is going to have an annual process, you have to. And do you find that it's easier to do rolling wave planning with a view that whether it is capacity funding or it's virtually capacity funding, do you find that you're able to do more kind of 12-month rolling wave planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly. I don't think all teams have adopted it, but some of the more teams are, and you have the 4 quarters, and you roll the 4 quarters, and you've got higher fidelity in what we're doing, at the front of the plan. Obviously, lower fidelity at the end, and you keep rolling that forward. And for me, that's definitely where. I mean, it's so different building a product yourself to buying a product and customizing it, and you can. If we buy a vendor platform and we install it and we work with a vendor, it's very hard, or it's much harder to apply principles of product development to that and work in those ways. It naturally lends itself more to SLA-based engagement, waterfall. But we're fortunate now that a lot of our technology in our bank we've built ourselves, so we can apply these product development type methods, product management type methods to evolving those products. And again, we should just keep investing in. We're keeping investing in where it makes sense. So yeah, and I think the rolling 4 quarters is exactly an example of that.
Great. And in terms of incentives, shared goals, so you mentioned embedded technology, getting tech and business even closer together, aligned to value, aligned to the flow of value. I presume long-lived multidisciplinary teams, tech and business, when you're in the office, physically co-located, I imagine, in terms of like FX trading on the trading floor, for example, I would imagine. A question about shared goals and OKRs. So the as you said, like the other side of the coin to value streams and long-lived multidisciplinary teams is OKRs, because you need to have a shared goal. Are you finding that you have that now? Do you have like shared goals which apply across your role-based speciality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there was a bit of a journey here and a bit of a learning as well. So when we started exploring OKRs, I I was heavily, I guess, involved in trying to get our organization to use OKRs at the beginning a few years back. And because of that, I felt it was important to me to have OKRs for my team. And we started doing that. But I realized probably within a year or two that actually having technology OKRs and business OKRs was creating a level of conflict. My team would come back to me and say, well, we're working on these things here, and you're telling us, or we've decided that these things are important, but actually, the business is saying this. And I actually stopped doing formal OKR process with most of my teams because we are part of the business, right? We're an embedded business team, and actually, our goals are the business goals. They're the same. Like we should be understanding and working with the product teams to develop and contribute to the business outcomes. And I think, yes, there are always going to be things that we need to do in technology, maybe that don't feed directly into a business outcome, but fundamentally, we want 80% of what we do aligned around the business outcomes. And that was a real learning for me there, actually, like going down the route of creating technology OKRs in a very closely business aligned environment, and then realizing they were competing and actually, scrapping those and really get everyone focused behind the business. And even things like security, I mean, cyber and security is so important nowadays, and there's so much work coming in, but actually the business, they understand that we have to make our systems secure. And that delivering secure systems for our customers is really is a ticket to the game when you work at a bank. I mean, one of the other things actually, while I'm talking about this piece, John, is we've tried to, we're trying to work with flow distribution as well. So because one of the things that again, it's about empowering teams with information so that they can have the right conversations when they go through prioritization conversations. But I think by flow distribution, I mean categorizing work into risk work, feature work, bugs, and tech debt, and trying to visualize that, at a team level and at a portfolio level. So actually, when we're working with product teams and trying to build new features, the product team can understand actually what's the real capacity that this team have to build new features, because we're spending 20 or 30% of our time on risk work, dealing with cyber stuff, patching stuff, or there's a bunch of maybe we haven't dealt with our tech debt for a couple of quarters and we've got to deal this piece. And I think visualizing that stuff to really try and elevate the true capacity that exists in teams to build feature work and exposing that stuff to the product teams and the business is also something we're trying to do, and it's working in some teams. And for me, the next part of our journey is about rolling that up and trying to do that at scale as well. And that I think that's something that's also come from the work Nick Kirsten's done in project to product, and we really like that as well.
Yeah, and I think that touches on what you said earlier, which is go slower to go faster. So if you can visualize your flow distribution and you can visualize whether you're doing continuous improvement or not, if you can see you're not doing continuous improvement, you're going to have a problem in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Nick, final question, which is, if other people could help you, how could they best help you?
Do you mean other people inside the organization or outside the organization?
Outside, and inside or outside ABSA. In terms of a community of learning, if others could help you, what would you be most interested in learning about from other organizations?
Look, I think the next phase of our kind of journey and improvement really, John, is trying to connect all these pieces of data. So we've got OKRs, we've got a system with OKRs in, we've got some really great work happening around flow, and we're starting to collect data at scale around flow. We've got some happiness measures that we're doing in teams, but I don't feel, and we're starting to try to piece this together to tell a combined story. But I think that's an area for me where we can improve and we can get better, is really starting to bring all these pieces together to tell a combined story and really roll up the data at scale. I mean, there's probably about 1,200 people in my organization, and there's also the trading investment park of the bank. So getting all that data from all those teams to make sense at a roll up level so that it talks to each other and been able to tell their stories. I think that's something I would love to learn more about and see how other organizations have tackled. And I think you actually covered that in some of your some of your other discussions which you shared with me. So certainly keen to learn more about that. And then I think the other thing is, and it's part of what I'm saying, John, is making sure that the work that everyone is doing is really, really connected to the strategic objectives and business outcomes of the organization. So, there's not, like generally, I think technology teams over the world work extremely, extremely hard. It's not a 9 to 5 type job. You're often deploying stuff in the evenings, on call, doing support of the weekends, and we all work really, really hard. And one of the things I want to ensure is that all the effort that goes in with my teams and with the product teams is really making as much difference as possible to the outcomes that we're chasing and ultimately our strategic objectives. So, how can we get better at connecting the work that's been done in all these teams, up to the broader strategic objectives of the organization, and ultimately the strategy, and see how that's moving the dial. And, I think we've got some stuff there, but really connecting that up through the organization is an area of growth and improvement for us. And those will be probably the next things I want to focus on.
That's great.
And any learning I can get from talking to anyone else would be great.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure. Like I said earlier, I could talk to you for hours on this topic. So good luck with the next step in your journey. Hopefully we get to have a chat again in 6 months, 12 months time.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you, John. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Nick.